you have to look at the competition within that community. And with many of these industry campaigns, the generic product promotion campaigns, clearly it's an association of competitors, and there are some issues with regard to that. There's antitrust, there's how people come together and what kinds of things they talk about. But that kind of competition in many ways is a little bit easier to deal with because everybody knows what the parameters are. The other kind of competition that you see is competing interests within the community or within the industry. And what do different entities get out of that relationship? The academic community is going to get something completely different out of this relationship than industry might. So how do you determine that all these other decisions on control and involvement and decision making when the interests are so diverse? So that the more diverse your entities within that coordinated campaign, within that community, I think it makes it a little bit tougher to make some of these other kinds of decisions. Funding is a big one. When you have a built-in infrastructure, as many of those industry campaigns do, funding's a little bit easier. You take it out of dues, you levy a certain assessment. Some of the campaigns, the generic product promotion campaigns, actually are voluntary associations or alliances, and people choose to kind of impose a levy on their own. It's not anything that is imposed from above. Some of them are mandated by government because these are commodities, and there's some ways to there's some interest to improve the industry and the economy of a state or of the nation. So some of them are legislated by government, but funding is a huge part of it. Who is going to pay for the campaign? How is that going to how's that contribution going to be made? So having the individual entities do some kind of assessment is one way, but there also can be external funding. There could be angel funding. There could be foundation funding. There's other ways to get that funding, but that funding question needs to be answered. We need to figure out how we're going to actually make this happen. I believe the campaign so far, the whole project has been funded with some of those external sources. So implementing the campaign. What kinds of factors are important in the implementation? Related to the funding is budgeting. And how will you determine that budgeting? How is that budgeting going to happen? The difficulty with certain kinds of funding arrangements is that the best way to design a campaign is to know how much money you have up front, okay? Because then you can design to that budget. So a $2 million budget, when you know that it's $2 million up front, is a completely different campaign than if you have $200,000 up front and then you add another 200 and another. So the best thing is to know the funding, the budgeting up front. That allows you to design a different type of campaign. You need consistency. You need to have, if you look at things from the standpoint of the target audience, and I think that the question about having a unified message is tied directly to your target audience. The target audience doesn't see an engineering community. Your target audience sees the messages, and they want to see consistency in those messages. And the consistency also, there's efficiency issues with that. There's effectiveness issues with that. We know that the more times that people see a message, the more likely we're going to have some opportunity to influence them in some way. We need to have consistency. These kinds of campaigns need to have consistency. Coordination. To get that consistency, you have to have coordination. You have to have some mechanism to ensure that people are using the messages in the right way, that people are doing things when they should be doing it. The coordination is a key part of it. And coordination can come either through some kind of, if the infrastructure is there, if you have that industry association, that's great. Sometimes coordination comes by hiring a communication firm to provide that. You can have an individual who's given that assignment to do that, or a group of individuals to do that kind of coordination. And measuring effectiveness. With those generic product promotion campaigns, effectiveness is easy to measure because if it's an economic purpose for that, did we go ahead and cheat? Did we sell more product? That's an easy thing to do. With many other kinds of campaigns, it's a little bit tougher to measure that effectiveness. And we talk about effectiveness being in kind of three categories when we look to measure whether or not our campaigns are doing well. One is those ultimate outcomes. And with sales, it's easy to measure that ultimate outcome. With other kinds of things, it's a little bit tougher. With a pipeline campaign, with a workforce campaign, you may not see results for 10 years because you're doing a lot of that groundwork for kids who are in elementary or middle school, and you're not going to see any kind of outcome for that for quite a while. So it's a little bit tougher in many cases to tie the campaign directly to results. But we also look at a couple of other kinds of measures. We look at what we call process measures, and process measures is how many times our message is out there, who's using our message, how many people might be seeing our message. It doesn't necessarily say that we've had any kind of impact or it's produced any outcome, but at least we know the level of effort that is going into to those messages. The third measure, which is between kind of process and those outcomes, is impact. Have we had any kind of impact on our target audiences? So have we changed people's level of awareness? Have we changed people's attitudes? That doesn't necessarily mean that we will get the desired outcome, but at least we know that to get that outcome, we have to make people aware, we have to make people knowledgeable, and we have to make people change their attitudes, have positive attitudes. Okay, some examples. I have 3 case studies here, and some are examples that it's just fun to look at what they've done, but others I think are a little bit more relevant. The first one, you can't do this kind of talk without talking about Got Milk. And Got Milk started in the early 90s. It started in California, and this was a voluntary alliance of milk processors in California who came together, who used for 15 years there was a decline in milk consumption. Okay, so from an economic standpoint, some people may say it was even almost a crisis kind of situation. We want to fix this. We don't want to continue seeing the decline. So they formed a voluntary alliance. They decided that they would contribute 3 cents for every gallon of milk that they processed to go into this fund. They came up with an initial annual budget of $23 million by doing that. They hired Goodby Silverstein in San Francisco, and they came up with a wonderfully clever campaign that I think we're all familiar with, and I'll show you the original ad that was a part of that. And by all accounts, it was very effective. I think the estimates ranged between about 24 to over $100 million in additional sales in the first couple of years. So it was an incredibly successful campaign. Eventually, they licensed the Got Milk concept, the Got Milk brand, that identification nationally to the National Dairy Board. So that's why we're, even if you're not in California, you're still seeing that. They've licensed it for merchandise and all sorts of ways to kind of expand the brand. It's still around. They still have a very active website. They still are constantly improving the ads that they have, which is really a long time for any campaign to be around and still to be have some kind of effectiveness. So usually campaigns wear out. But there's estimates that there's 97% awareness of Got Milk, which is really probably almost as good as Coke. So do you want to see the original ad? You click on the Got Milk. And why don't you put it up?
And that was the Vienna Wood Dancing Bee, one of my all-time favorites. And now let's make that random call with today's $10,000 question. It's a tough one. Who shot Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel? All right, let's go to the phones and see who's out there.
Hello, for $10,000. Who shot... book.
You're hearing this.
Excuse me?
Random book. Oh, hold on, let me take a look. No!
And that was the Vienna Wood Dancing Bee, one of my all-time favorites. And now let's make that random call with today's $10,000 question. It's a tough one. Who shot Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel? All right, let's go to the phones and see who's out there.
Hello, for $10,000. Who
Random book.
Excuse me?
Random book. Oh, hold on, let me take a look. No!
I'm afraid your time is almost up.
Random book.
I'm sorry. Maybe next time.
And there's some very interesting things about that campaign, and I think it has some relevance to the changing the conversation. That's based on research. They did extensive research, and they found that everybody kind of knew the message that milk is good for you, that it's wholesome, it's good for you. It's kind of like everybody understood that you need math and science for engineering, which were kind of the previous messages that the engineering community had adopted. But research said that you have to take it a step further than that for this, and they wanted to find out, what kind of relationship do people have with milk, and they also found that people made a connection between milk and sweet and sticky kinds of desserts and snacks. And that's where this came from. It's not so much, what the properties of milk might be, but what is the relationship that the target audience has with milk? And clearly, it was something that has been fairly successful. The next one is the Century Council. The Century Council is a nonprofit that was established by a number of distillers, and started in 1991. It kind of fulfills that public service and corporate social responsibility purpose for coordinated outreach campaigns. It entirely to help promote responsible drinking, but there's also kind of the public image, the image of the industry. They didn't want to be the bad guys in all of this. They wanted to be ahead of the curve, and they wanted to make sure that that they were working with legislators and regulators on these kinds of issues and not against them. So there is both a lobbying and an education function in this whole process. The website says that their total investment since 1991 has been $175 million. But the way that was worded is that it's $175 million that has been dedicated by this handful of 9 or 10 distillers toward this kind of effort. So some of it could have been on their own that they're doing this. I was able to find that an article that actually said that the advertising, the communication piece of that budget is about $1 million a year. So it's really not, from a communication standpoint, there's not that much money being put into it.